I am starting to do some new things for 2023. And one of them, to celebrate the 100 years of Disney that we have this year, is my very own merch collection. Now, if you've wanted some way to support Synergy Loves Company, this is going to be a way that you can do that. Though I tried to make these designs for the merch be something a little more open to all Disney company fans. Like they're not just Synergy Loves Company things. They're things for all Disney fans, especially fans of the Walt Disney Company. So the series I have is called Pop Synergy: The Classic Years. I know you might be thinking of a Disney hotel that has a similar name. And yes, I was inspired with Pop Synergy: The Classic Years by Pop Century Resort. This is like my home resort when we go to the parks. This is where we usually like to stay. We love the Skyliner. So I often think of the Pop Century Resort, and thinking of the 100 years of the Walt Disney Company, I can't help but think about how this resort was supposed to represent the entire century, the entire 100 years from the 1900s on to the 1990s. But of course, it only got in the second half, the classic years. Maybe there will be some legendary years coming from a merch line for me soon, but we'll have to wait and see. So Pop Synergy, I'm going to go through and talk about each of the designs and what I tried to do here, and then let you know where you can get your hands on this stuff. So it is a T Public set of designs. They're all available on T Public, and I started to think about the last half decade of the company. And really, when you think about it, it ended up being the Waltless years. So I decided to start in the 70s. And so what I did is I took each decade, much like we would in the Pop Century Hotel, I took each decade and I tried to create a style reminiscent of maybe a design or feel from that decade, and kind of have a nod to something that was happening in the company at the time. So in the 70s, I have the shirt "What Would Walt Do?" We kind of hear that when, after Walt passed away, the company ran on autopilot. There's a cool 70s "What Would Walt Do" design to represent the 70s with the company. In the 80s, I took a riff on the iconic "Frankie Says Relax" shirt. Maybe you've got that in your mind right now. And I decided to make mine say "Mikey Says Synergy" with a little image of my pal Michael Eisner on there. And I couldn't help but put Synergy in it. Synergy Loves Company. And that's really when Eisner started synergizing the company as much as he possibly could. He's maybe the godfather of synergy, of the more recent Disney company. I know Walt had his synergy too, but Michael Eisner made it his battle cry, synergy. So Mikey Says Synergy from the 80s in the style of Frankie Says Relax. In the 90s was tricky, because in the Walt Disney Company, the 90s is the Disney decade, but it's also the beginning of the unraveling of the Eisner era. I decided to take a look at one of the most iconic things to organize yourself, and that is the Trapper Keeper. So I have a Trapper Keeper inspired design that, of course, this Trapper Keeper was probably just as popular in the 80s and the 90s, and probably started to fall out of favor in the late 90s, much like Michael Eisner's strategic planning division. So this is my strategic planning Trapper Keeper Eisner era design for the 90s. It's pretty cool. Go take a look. In the 2000s, two things happen in the mid 2000s, and they actually happened in 2004, the same year. I got to double check that I got that correct. 2004, the same year. Both, we get the Save Disney campaign, the campaign that Roy E. Disney uses to oust Michael Eisner. And we get the movie Napoleon Dynamite, which is not a Disney property, but it becomes one when Disney buys 20th Century Fox. Later, actually, Bob Iger buys 21st Century Fox, as we could call it now, 21st Century. And that is I got a Napoleon Dynamite style vote for Iger shirt, kind of like the vote for Pedro one, because that's when the company was trying to push out Eisner and bring in Iger. So there's my 2000s tribute design. In 2010, Iger starts the 2010s, I should say. And really this probably goes back to when Iger takes over in the mid 2000s too, but Iger's style was all about adding more to the company, and it reminded me of those ampersand shirts that started to become very widely popular at the time. And so I have one that says Iger and Oswald and Shanghai and acquisitions and streaming plus, because those were all the things that he started to add to the company in that iconic style that became really famous around that 2010s time. And then last but not least, we have to talk about the 2020s. I know the 2020s just got started. We're just beginning the 2020s. But we had a CEO for a very short time in the 2020s who gave us so much material to work with. So we have the Activate the Synergy Machine shirt. There's a tons of little Easter eggs on here to those 999 days that we had the CEO, Bob Chapek, and all of what he did for or to the company. So those are my decade shirts. It's going to be really cool. If you're listening to this, all of those shirts that I made are you can see them on the YouTube video from the stream, or you'll sneak a peek at my Twitter and my Instagram over the next few days, and you'll start to see these designs pop up one after another, with links to go find them. Because if you're listening, you can't see them. You just heard me talking about them. I also couldn't help myself. I made one more shirt. This one is my logo for Synergy Loves Company, but in kind of a 90s remix way with shapes, cool shapes. Maybe a little Memphis-y looking, maybe a little Wonders of Life looking. But it's there, and you could represent Synergy Loves Company with this one in kind of a cool 90s style. So like I said, I'll put a link in the description, the show notes, where you can see these shirts, where you can order them, find them on TeePublic. You could find them on synergylovescompany.com, my website. There will be a link to the shop. You could find them through my social media, of course. And then I'll have to keep thinking about what I should do later this year for the legendary years. Maybe I'll just make some art of animation type thing instead. Just kidding. That's what happened, though, of course, to the Legendary Years Hotel in the Pop Century area. So we'll see if my Legendary Years project ever gets off the ground. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. Make sure, though, that if you do want to wait and see, you are subscribed or following me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at Eric H. Synergy. Find me on Instagram at Synergy Loves Company, or Facebook.com/Synergy Loves Company. If you like this video, like and subscribe. If you really like this video, visit SynergyLovesCompany.com for the full audio podcast.